Hello there and happy Friday. Nice to see you here. My name is Julie Hirschberg. I am the owner and founder of Reactive Therapy and Wellness. And joining you live, I'm going to fix my setting a little bit here. Joining you live as I do every week, just to share a little bit about what we are learning and doing at Reactive and share it freely to the world, like with you all. And I don't know about you, it's just been daylight savings time, but this has definitely thrown me off this week. I love having sun in the morning, and it's been very hard. I like to get up early. I miss my son. But one of the things that has really kept me going this week is my excitement from the course that we had last weekend, which was Neuropracticity 4.0. I know I shared a little bit about this last week. I had some more things I'm probably going to share for a few weeks now because there was just so much that really resonated with me and really made me think a lot about how we do practice and practice that drives neuroplasticity or brain changes. And this is coming from the literature. So I'm bringing in a lot of literature today. And this was one of the things that really struck me. And I think particularly because this was an area I had looked at a lot too, but Mike Studer, who did the course, put it together so nice. And this was about challenge points and play in our therapy, but also I think in life. That's probably why this resonated with me so much, is really just thinking about this in life. So today I want to discuss about this updated idea about the challenge point framework. And many of us have learned this in motor learning and in PT or OT school. Mike brought an update and brought a really nice article, which, by the way, I'll link to the articles and other resources that I'll refer to today in our live. It's in our newsletter. It comes out on Friday. So if you're not already a part of our newsletter, you can join that at reactiveeducation.com. But we're going to talk about challenge point framework and this idea of practicing to learn versus practicing to transfer versus practicing to maintain. And there's just been a lot of interesting research beyond just the challenge point theory in play and how we can incorporate play into therapy more. Now, I know if you're a pediatric therapist, you're already going like, this is what I do all the time. I think it comes so naturally with kids because play is their occupation. That's like what they're meant to do. And we lose that as adults. So that's a big part of kind of my excitement for this topic. So let's start with challenge point framework. If you hadn't heard about it, this was definitely something that was part of my own training, but I didn't know all of the background on it, particularly because I came out of school before they even published the challenge point framework, but we definitely talked about it since I've been out of school. But this challenge point framework was a model of motor learning. It was published in 2004. The two authors are Guadagnoli and Lee. I'm not sure if I said that first name right, but it's from 2004, and this is one of Dick Schmidt's colleagues who's on this paper. So that also puts, anytime I hear a motor like learning framework or theory, I'm always thinking about Dick Schmidt, who is the namesake of our fellowship. So the original paper, 2004. Now there was a recent article, and I'll put it in our newsletter from 2022 that really expanded the framework to apply into sports coaching. Now, maybe you're wondering, like, Julie, why you're talking about sports coaching, because that's not what you do, and it's absolutely not what I do. But when you think about what we do in therapy, I think these principles really apply. So the original challenge point framework looked at the difficulty of the task in thinking about our how we practice the task. Consider that with how challenging the task is for that individual person. And it really very much struck a chord in the rehab world of how we can optimize practice and think about things not only from immediate gains in practice, so that's performance, versus long-term learning. And things that might be helpful for performance might not actually be helpful for a long time learning and retention and transfer. So one of the key components of this framework was that increased difficulty during practice might be detrimental for performance in the short term, but ultimately beneficial for learning in the long term. So that's great. And there's a lot of motor control, motor learning research that has gone into that. What the authors in this 2022 review really talk about is that when there are difficulties or challenges in practice, those can also have a motivational cost. I don't know if this has ever happened to you. It certainly has happened to me that I try a new task that is so challenging initially that I just give up, right? So there's a motivational cost there. If anybody else has tried snowboarding, they know this. I stuck with snowboarding for sure, but boy, is there a cost to sticking with it. It's really hard to learn. There are a lot of falls. And at some point, the number of falls exceeds the reward and you might not continue. So we have to think about the motivational cost. And this is a product of introducing more errors into practice and a really, really poor performance initially. Right. So a second point to think about with the challenge point framework is that maybe not all difficulties are equally beneficial to learning. And so this has been a lot more recent research in this area. It's not the difficulty itself, but the psychologic processes that happen within the difficulty. And some of those are actually desirable. Some of the literature that also has come out is task specificity and how specific the practice is to the task itself. So one of the things that these authors talked about in kind of expanding the challenge framework was to conceptualize three different types of practice: practicing to learn, practicing to transfer to another setting, right? Or practicing to maintain. I really love these distinctions. So Mike took this a step further to put this into rehab, not just into sports coaching, but practicing to learn. So when we set up practice for learning, this is where we might mess up, we might attempt, we might experiment. We get a lot of repetitions and where we might actually figure or discover something out about the task and our body brain even there. Practice to transfer. So this is where we might put some pressure on. Get the mechanics of it, the fundamentals more resilient, not necessarily perfect, but resilient. And ensuring that all of the variables have a transfer to your function. Now, the authors would talk about sport, but we might say function to your everyday activity. Things like speed, the context you're in, the distractions. Mike used this really nice like phrasing of like loading up and challenging a person with the pressure on. And then finally practicing to maintain. So here we're just practicing to keep up that skill, not really gaining, not losing at all. So those would be the three ways of thinking about practicing. And here's where Mike takes it a little bit further, and I want to take it further today, is connecting this to play. So Mike asked the question in our Neuropractice 4.0, could we let our patients experience practice in a more playful way rather than in a way that's punitive? Now, this is not to say that any of us are punishing people in our practice at all, but we maybe aren't setting up so that there's not stakes involved. So low stakes game. And how can we, Mike really challenged us, how could we think about the way we set up practice to be even more playful. So here's where some even more literature comes in, and one of my favorite recent podcasts really ties into this really nicely, this idea of play and what it does for the brain. So if you haven't heard me talk about this before on this podcast and research lab at Stanford, it's the Huberman Lab podcast. Andrew Huberman shares really great insights and research in neuroscience every week. It's 2 hours usually. It's like a phenomenally long podcast. It usually takes me a few drives to get through it. I highly recommend it. Again, I'll put a link in our newsletter, but he did a podcast on play and the neurobiological effects of play. And I listened to that podcast just a couple of weeks before the neuroplasticity course. So the themes lined up really, really well. And again, I'll put the links in the newsletter for this, but there were a couple of articles that he highlighted and summarized. One of them was called In Search of the Neurobiological Substrates for Social Playfulness in Mammalian Brains. So really thinking about what is happening in the brain when we play and how might that, lay down new neural pathways or open up doors for learning and changes in our brain. Oh, I love this topic. So, as a summary, this was a review article. Some of the key points there is that if we are doing a task or even like playing or learning under a lot of stress, increased adrenaline, for example, this will actually inhibit our playfulness. So he spoke a lot in reviewing this article about this idea of low stakes, and Mike Studer talked about this as well. Low stakes actually allow some of those neural pathways, the endogenous opioids, to be liberated and free. So the more low stakes it is, the higher we have a higher release of endogenous opioids. So what does this mean? Low stakes. So not not when you have a lot on the line, right? So not when this podcast came out, I think it was around the Super Bowl. So like not when you're playing in the Super Bowl. That's not a low stakes game, right? And I thought about this a lot because I have been playing volleyball with my daughter quite a bit. I'm not a volleyball player and she is. And I was thinking a lot of the times when I'm playing, it's no stakes at all. Like it doesn't matter who wins. We're just kind of like goofing around. Maybe I'm trying to get better, like to hit the ball actually over or to block or something like that. And I'm thinking, wow, like playfulness level very high in my family volleyball games because there's no stakes. But if my daughter has a tournament, which she does this weekend, then the stakes go up. The stakes are higher, more adrenaline, more stress associated with that. That's usually not a playful state, right? And different, then we have adrenaline released, and which in the spirit of competition can actually be beneficial in that moment. But the state of playfulness, the low stakes, is actually where our prefrontal cortex is allowed to explore new possibilities. We can tinker. We're not rigid. We can be flexible in our thinking. And this is really one of the things that can get lost on us in adults. It can actually get lost on us as therapists trying to set up a therapy routine for somebody. Is sometimes we too can be pretty rigid and lose the idea of playfulness. So this was something that really struck home to me again from neuropracticity and some of my more recent learning. One more article that Andrew Huberman talked about in the podcast was this really interesting one from just a couple years ago called Brief Playfulness Exercise Improves Patient Outcomes. Again, I have a link to all of these in our newsletter. But basically, they did a randomized, placebo-controlled online playfulness intervention study to look at the playfulness effect on well-being and depression. And I think, you know what? In the era of COVID and isolation, this is something that we really need. And what they actually found amongst four groups of people where they had them reflect on playfulness and regardless of the group that the person was in, all of them benefited from the intervention of just reflecting on the playfulness during the day, either in themselves or another person. So they had improved well-being, diminished depression scores. And here's what's interesting. The greatest effect came from documenting how others were playful and from trying to use playfulness in a new way. I think that's really cool. I think that if we can incorporate playfulness into therapy, this could really change the game for people, lower the stakes, lower the adrenaline level, increase endogenous opioids, and really allow somebody to learn a task in a new and flexible way. This has challenged me to think of playful ways that we can be doing things in therapy for sure. But it also, the win-win is that we're playful too as therapists. And so if playfulness can improve our patients' well-being and depression, and if being playful can also improve our own, then together, I think win, win, win. And to me, that is a genuine neuropracticity nugget. So that's what I wanted to share today. That idea of challenge point of different ways to practice and using playfulness as one of those ways that we might incorporate practice for motor learning. And one last thing before I sign off here is I wanted to share that we have just put together a free webinar for PTs and OTs. It is coming out the end of March, beginning of April. It's called the Complex Case Mini Course. So it's a full mini course, 90 minutes where we are sharing the 3 most effective strategies to help you get started. If you're working with somebody with a complex case, we're going to introduce our framework, how you get started, how you simplify it, and also how that can help you reduce burnout. So complex case strategies for managing and reducing burnout. It's an awesome little course, and I would love for you to join us. So I'll put a link in our newsletter as well, but you can sign up for that at reactiveeducation.com. It's free. It's totally free for you. We have a mission to really empower and inspire therapists to be able to really help people with complex cases get the kind of therapy and support that they need, and to help therapists who work with people with complex cases get the support they need. So I hope you'll join us for that course that's coming up at the end of the month and completely free. So I want to thank you again for joining me today. I will see you soon. I'll see you next week, and have a great weekend. Thank you.